languid perusal of the bill of fare. This latter document was a great puzzle to our friends, who, on reflecting that its bewildering categories had relation to breakfast alone, had an uneasy prevision of an encyclopedic dinner list. They found a great deal of entertainment at the hotel, an enormous wooden structure, for the erection of which it seemed to them that the virgin forests of the West must have been terribly deflowered. It was perforated from end to end with immense bare corridors, through which a strong draught was blowing, bearing along wonderful figures of ladies in white morning dresses and clouds of Valenciennes lace, who seemed to float down the long vistas with expanded furbelows, like angels spreading their wings. In front was a gigantic veranda, upon which an army might have encamped, a vast wooden terrace with a roof as lofty as the nave of a cathedral. Here our young Englishmen enjoyed, as they supposed, a glimpse of American society, which was distributed over the measureless expanse in a variety of sedentary attitudes, and appeared to consist largely of pretty young girls, dressed as if for a fete champêtre, swaying to and fro in rocking chairs, fanning themselves with large straw fans, and enjoying an enviable exemption from social cares. Lord Lambeth had a theory, which it might be interesting to trace to its origin, that it would be not only agreeable, but easily possible, to enter into relations with one of these young ladies, and his companion, as he had done a couple of days before, found occasion to check the young nobleman's colloquial impulses. "You had better take care," said Percy Beaumont, "or you will have an offended father or brother pulling out a bowie knife." "Well, I assure you it is all right," Lord Lambeth replied. "You know the Americans come to these big hotels to make acquaintances." "I know nothing about it, and neither do you," said his kinsman, who, like a clever man, had begun to perceive that the observation of American society demanded a readjustment of one's standard. "Hang it, then let's find out," cried Lord Lambeth with some impatience. "You know I don't want to miss anything." "We will find out," said Percy Beaumont very reasonably. "We will go and see Mrs. Westgate and make all proper inquiries." And so the two inquiring Englishmen, who had this lady's address inscribed in her husband's hand upon a card, descended from the veranda of the big hotel and took their way, according to direction, along a large straight road, past a series of fresh-looking villas, embosomed in shrubs and flowers, and enclosed in an ingenious variety of wooden palings. The morning was brilliant and cool. The villas were smart and snug, and the walk of the young travelers was very entertaining. Everything looked as if it had received a coat of fresh paint the day before. The red roofs, the green shutters, the clean bright browns and buffs of the house fronts. The flower beds on the little lawns seemed to sparkle in the radiant air, and the gravel in the short carriage sweeps to flash and twinkle. Along the road came 100 little basket phaetons, in which, almost always, a couple of ladies were sitting, ladies in white dresses and long white gloves, holding the reins and looking at the two Englishmen, whose nationality was not elusive, through thick blue veils tied tightly about their faces as if to guard their complexions. At last the young men came within sight of the sea again, and then, having interrogated a gardener over the paling of a villa, they turned into an open gate. Here they found themselves face to face with the ocean and with a very picturesque structure, resembling a magnified chalet, which was perched upon a green embankment just above it. The house had a veranda of extraordinary width all around it, and a great many doors and windows standing open to the veranda. These various apertures had, in common, such an accessible, hospitable air, such a breezy flutter within of light curtains, such expansive thresholds and reassuring interiors, that our friends hardly knew which was the regular entrance, and, after hesitating a moment, presented themselves at one of the windows. The room within was dark, but in a moment a graceful figure vaguely shaped itself in the rich-looking gloom, and a lady came to meet them. Then they saw that she had been seated at a table writing, and that she had heard them and had got up. She stepped out into the light. She wore a frank, charming smile, with which she held out her hand to Percy Beaumont. "Oh, you must be Lord Lambeth and Mr. Beaumont," she said. "I have heard from my husband that you had come. I am extremely glad to see you." And she shook hands with each of her visitors. Her visitors were a little shy, but they had very good manners. They responded with smiles and exclamations, and they apologized for not knowing the front door. The lady rejoined with vivacity that when she wanted to see people very much, she did not insist upon those distinctions, and that Mr. Westgate had written to her of his English friends in terms that made her really anxious. "He said you were terribly prostrated," said Mrs. Westgate. "Oh, you mean by the heat?" replied Percy Beaumont. "We were rather knocked up, but we feel wonderfully better. We had such a jolly voyage down here. It's so very good of you to mind." "Yes, it's so very kind of you," murmured Lord Lambeth. Mrs. Westgate stood smiling. She was extremely pretty. "Well, I did mind," she said, "and I thought of sending for you this morning to the Ocean House. I am very glad you are better, and I am charmed you have arrived. You must come round to the other side of the piazza." And she led the way, with a light, smooth step, looking back at the young men and smiling. The other side of the piazza was, as Lord Lambeth presently remarked, a very jolly place. It was of the most liberal proportions, and with its awnings, its fanciful chairs, its cushions and rugs, its view of the ocean close at hand, tumbling along the base of the low cliffs whose level tops intervened in lawn-like smoothness, it formed a charming complement to the drawing-room. As such, it was in course of use at the present moment. It was occupied by a social circle. There were several ladies and 2 or 3 gentlemen, to whom Mrs. Westgate proceeded to introduce the distinguished strangers. She mentioned a great many names very freely and distinctly. The young Englishmen, shuffling about and bowing, were rather bewildered. But at last they were provided with chairs, low wicker chairs, gilded and tied with a great many ribbons. And one of the ladies, a very young person with a little snub nose and several dimples, offered Percy Beaumont a fan. The fan was also adorned with pink love knots. But Percy Beaumont declined it, although he was very hot. Presently, however, it became cooler. The breeze from the sea was delicious, the view was charming, and the people sitting there looked exceedingly fresh and comfortable. Several of the ladies seemed to be young girls, and the gentlemen were slim, fair youths, such as our friends had seen the day before in New York. The ladies were working upon bands of tapestry, and one of the young men had an open book in his lap. Beaumont afterward learned from one of the ladies that this young man had been reading aloud, that he was from Boston, and was very fond of reading aloud. Beaumont said it was a great pity that they had interrupted him. He should like so much, from all he had heard, to hear a Bostonian read. Couldn't the young man be induced to go on? "Oh, no," said his informant very freely. "He won't be able to get the young ladies to attend to him now." There was something very friendly, Beaumont perceived, in the attitude of the company. They looked at the young Englishman with an air of animated sympathy and interest. They smiled brightly and unanimously at everything either of their visitors said. Lord Lambeth and his companion felt that they were being made very welcome. Mrs. Westgate seated herself between them, and, talking a great deal to each, they had occasion to observe that she was as pretty as their friend Littledale had promised. She was 30 years old, with the eyes and smile of a girl of 17, and she was extremely light and graceful, elegant, exquisite. Mrs. Westgate was extremely spontaneous. She was very frank and demonstrative, and appeared always, while she looked at you delightedly with her beautiful young eyes, to be making sudden confessions and concessions after momentary hesitations. "We shall expect to see a great deal of you," she said to Lord Lambeth with a kind of joyous earnestness. "We are very fond of Englishmen here. That is, there are a great many we have been fond of,